let's see how this is working. So far, so good. We're up and running and on point. Okay, so welcome everybody again to another Roid. Basically, rapid fire questions. Try to get to the nit and bodybuilding and pharmacology related questions as we can, or even just really sort of anything as it relates to health, lifestyle, fitness kind of stuff. Usually there's a lot of drug questions in there, but sometimes there is some good general questions. Everything in between the use of drugs and just how much protein should I eat. So feel free to ask as many questions as you would like. And as always, we will continue with the questions we have gathered throughout the year, or I suppose week since we last talked, and answer some of those. So how's it going, Adam?
It's going good, man. Going good. Like I said, for myself, as you all know, somewhat, I wouldn't say deep, but a few weeks deep into a surplus phase. And yeah, it's been quite interesting. Like I said, I've sort of had that elevation in resting heart rate, but I think that's working quite well in the sense, or rather it's coming down quite well in the sense that I've been smashing a fair bit of HIIT cardio post-workout, which is, actually I'm kind of half enjoying it now, which is good. But I think, leading to my questions I asked, well, one of the questions was like, well, why do cardio in the off season? Like, we see guys like Sam Sulek do it, and I get a lot of people question like, oh, isn't it just not going to increase your caloric deficit? And I thought maybe segueing from that, that's sort of a good question to start off with, which like, what are the benefits of doing cardio? So why would you do it? Wouldn't you just increase the caloric amount that you have to eat? And also someone sent me a video from Jay Cutler when Jay Cutler was like, oh, I didn't do any cardio in the off season. I just kept it for the contest prep. So what are your thoughts on that? Well, I already know, but let's share with the
Yeah, I mean, so, and I think, okay, so I think there's differences between Jay Cutler and you or I and the 130-pound bikini competitor, right? Like there's a vast difference at a physiological level between those three different individuals, right? And when you're walking around at 300 plus, like very well, cardio may be an ineffective tool at that point because your main goal is to gain mass, and your stomach only has so much capacity to put cubic inches and stretch on it. There's not like, it's not an infinite organ in a sense. So it's one of those things where, maybe for Jay it might work, but for most people, I would argue that the benefit far outweighs the detriment when it relates to doing cardio. So for instance, at a physiological level, when we talk about sort of epigenetic changes and adaptations that happen from training, one of those when we lift weights is like an mTOR response. And then through that, we have like myonuclear donation, and we have the upregulation of protein synthesis, and we develop new muscle cells and potentially, and or just grow muscle in structural capacity in cross-sectional area to furthermore gain strength to support our ability to push more weight. And we also gain bone mineral density. Those are like some of the adaptations that happen when you train your muscles. But what happens when we train our body as a cardiovascular, different. Adaptations still occur, but they're different. But those adaptations can be wildly useful in the term of building muscle, right? So like when you think doing high intensity cardio, you have greater capillarization of muscle tissue, or just in tissue in general, right? So what does that translate to? Well, more nutrient delivery to the muscles you're training. Not only that, but when you're in fat loss phase, now adipose sites don't have lack of blood flow, so you have free flowing blood, and then the lipolysis happening as you are training hard, I'd imagine, and doing some cardio and in a deficit allows for that fat to be partitioned much easier, and especially in those unwilling areas to lose fat, you might find that what also happens is you have mitochondrial biogenesis, which ultimately solves multiple issues, which is you have a lesser degree of insulin resistance when you're pushing food. You have a greater response to carbohydrate and fatty acid, ATP production, and ultimately you're healthier in general in the sense that as a metabolic being, you can partition and utilize food for performance-based endeavors and not just be this sort of like walking, mouth-breathing monster. I think the issue is that a lot of people perpetuate the thought that cardio is going to completely decompartmentalize your gains, and I truly don't believe that's even possible in the realm of what we're doing, especially if it's like, you know, the adaptation that gets created from cardio doesn't need you to do an hour of cardio day. Like 10 minutes of intense cardio, 5 minutes of intense cardio can make those adaptations that are notable over time. And as long as twice, 3 times, 4 times a week, you'll be more than happy with the results at the end of the year.
No, I completely agree with you there. I mean, you've also given, I guess the physiological or more complex stuff, but sort of even make it simpler or give some people some more applicable functions. Is that one? What do we know the two main things, or what are the common things that stop an off season? These are things that stop an off season, in my opinion. One, getting too fat. That's one thing. You've decreased insulin sensitivity and getting too fat. And the other thing is, well, if you're somewhat responsible, is your health markers getting out of whack, specifically heart rate and blood pressure. And what are the things that Kolton, who's clearly just discussed, what are things that bring those things down and improve it? Cardio. So my argument is use cardio as a tool to extend your off season to keep, like in my case, heart rate in check, help modulate blood pressure, help with insulin sensitivity, and try to reduce or minimize the amount of additional adipose tissue gain in your surplus. Yes, the overall caloric, surplus or deficit would dictate that, but again, with implementing the cardio, we find that we can have potentially better nutrient partitioning, better output, better training output too. Because again, in many individuals training, the cardiovascular system can be a limiting factor, especially if you're doing higher rep work. You want your target muscle to be a limiting factor, not your cardiovascular system. So I think we've pretty much well covered that. But long story short, in our opinions, we always think whether you're in the off season or on contest or off-season contest prep, whatever phase it is, we should have some form of cardio. And maybe you simply just titrated that based on your needs, whether it's for cardiovascular adaptations and expenditure or just expenditure. I would say I do like to separate my cardio in terms of its purpose. So when I'm doing HIIT post workout, I'm not doing it for the expenditure really. I don't really care about how many calories I burn. What I care about is when the elevation in my heart rate and the cardiovascular adaptations. When I'm doing steps or low intensity cardio, that is more so for activity levels and general expenditure, especially when I'll increase step count and increase low intensity steady state cardio during a fat loss phase. So I do sort of approach it from different mindsets. Like one is for cardiovascular health and one is for expenditure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and the one thing that I'd like to add, even on top of that, is I think it's not stated clearly enough, but it needs to be. When you transition into a prep, oftentimes there's that big lull where nothing happens. And then 4 weeks, 5 weeks later, you start to see changes happen. And ultimately, what this is like it's just a regulatory mechanism. Like you were inefficient so much at partitioning nutrients, catch up through startup, and you're already doing cardio, already doing like these massive amounts of steps just to start prep, versus maybe you did that stuff year round, right? Like maybe you did a moderate amount to a low. You have that, like I said, capillarization of tissue. You had that mitochondria density and biogenesis happen. And so when you begin to shift towards fat loss, much faster rate, much more efficient, requiring less cardio on the grand scheme of things, and ultimately just in total requiring work from you. And I think that's the key. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So
we have a question.
Yeah, I was gonna actually shout that one out. So Joe R asked, what pharmacology would you suggest to boost female in her late 30s and early 40s libido into high normal range? You go ahead with that one. I actually have a couple ideas, but if you have any.
So I have a couple. Yeah. So now, okay. So yeah, you did portion down to pharmacology, as you all know. So in terms of I was going to say open communication is important too, but let's narrow it down to pharmacology. So pharmacology range, I think the easiest and safest route for US individuals, what I like to include, is DHA and pregnenolone. I can find a low dose of that. Anyway, you can either start from anywhere from even 12.5 milligrams, depending on how they metabolize and react to it, all the way upwards to 25 milligrams of DHA and pregnenolone. You can start anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams, upwards to 100. Again, I like to err on the conservative side, and increase it as required and sort of play with the different dosages rather than going straight to like, a maximum dose of that. As we know, DHEA and pregnant precursor hormones, which might help boost her natural sex hormones. Then another thing, which depending on how, if this is your partner or regardless who this female individual is, depending on how, I guess, susceptible or open they are to straight up injections, but you could test her sex hormone, see where her natural testosterone is lying, and potentially implement an HRT testosterone dosage, lows of like to get her from, let's say she's sitting on like low to middle of the reference range, potentially try to get her to the upper end of the reference range, so still within the reference range, not super large physiological dosage of testosterone, but a legitimate HRT dosage. That would help. Now, again, also oxandrolone is known to increase female sex drive, but I wouldn't say putting on a female, just putting them on an animal-based oxandrolone just to increase their libido. Wouldn't really go with that. I'd rather go with the DHA pregnenolone route, or even potentially the HRT route, personally. And then those are, I guess, the I guess most intense pharmacological options that I would go for. And then it sounds silly as hell, but this is assuming that she's really on a good diet and exercise, because you can give her as much pharmacology as you want, but if you don't have if you're not having a good diet and exercise, I would argue that is going to boost your libido way more than any pharmacological route. But I'm assuming that that's already occurred. So those would be the main go-tos for myself. There's a lot of, I guess, over-the-counter supplements you get, but from a pharmacology perspective, that's what I would go for.
Yeah, I mean, look, like if she's on a caloric deficit, just not feasible to have a sex drive, like depending on what her body fat is and how little calories she's consuming, and specifically how low of fat she's consuming. It's just, sometimes it just won't happen, right? But like, let's say she's eating a decent, and for most females, that's honestly hovering between 1,700 to 2,500, depending on their body mass and what they're able to work with. But ultimately, I think Adam nailed it on the head, that we're looking at, HRT or just pregnenolone and DHEA are really good tools. Now, I personally like micronized progesterone in combination with like a very low dose testosterone administration. So like literally like 2.5 to 3.5 milligrams a week of testosterone with about 100 of progesterone administered daily. That's like a really great combo. Now, if you wanted a shortcut, a really good option would be Anavar, I think. Like, but obviously you can't just be like feeding your girlfriend this shit and not telling her what it is. Like, she has to be aware and understand that these things are going to likely induce physiological changes to her if she is under the influence, sort of say, for long enough. So I would be careful in that sense. There are a lot of great peptides like PT151, and even melanotan can be effective for females, but also invasive, right? So like, you have to consider the fact that these necessarily favorably work in the sense of, hey, I'm going to go, stab myself with an IM injection, babe, real quick, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to get at it. I don't think that happens very often. So I would say, yeah, likely start with like pregnenolone, DHEA, and then look into possibly HRT, like real prescribable HRT. And micronized progesterone is a really good one. And then if you're looking for something more acute, I think, like PT151, or there's many different peptides for this, and I don't want an exhaustive list to be created here, but simply do some brief research and find that there's many out there. There's also topical formulations that are made for females in clinical practice, where they will have like localized sort of inflammatory molecules to place in the area, right? And this causes some sort of sexual, or at least to make sure the chemistry up top is also good, as well as the chemistry down below. But the begging part is has a psychological aversion to having sex, aversion, like he's having just
I think
maybe psychological.
Sorry, I think you're cutting out there. I don't know if the viewers can still see the video.
Okay, well, basically, well, physiological reaction to the treatment.
Yeah,
Just
so
completely
dude, I
shitting.
think a bit of that last part, I think the internet just shut itself.
I'm gonna connect to my Bluetooth or hotspot.
Yeah. Excuse my ignorance, but I thought like US internet was like top notch, or was it just like all over the place in terms of speed?
It's all over the place. It's terrible. It's good. It's bad.
Surprisingly, coming to Thailand, the internet is significantly better than Australia. Yeah, I'm just watching the stream, I think, to see it catch up.
Yeah, okay. So my internet just disconnected. Now it's back on. Is it better now?
I can hear you. I think the video's come back. Yep. There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Cool beans. Sorry about that. It's kind of my place for some reason has really dodgy internet.
Oh, yeah. No, I paid for a pretty good.
Is it better now, or is it?
Yeah, no, it's better now.
Okay.
Better now. And yeah,
Cool.
you can see you.
So where did I cut off? Because I think that was really important what I was talking about, but it may be irrelevant at this point.
I think when you were speaking about the localized acute administrations of pharmacology, basically, that's when it cut off.
Yeah, that was a while ago. So basically what I was saying is there's like a physiological response and there's a psychological response. So you have to make sure that there's, which one's which, like top or bottom, basically, right? And if it's a physiological response, like she's not having discharge or fluid or like clitoral enlargement, which can happen in that moment, not like long term, that might be a physiological response that she's not having. So looking into that might be really important. If she's psychologically just not getting stimulated, but maybe there is some physiological response, that's another thing, right? And then you're looking at different treatments with certain forms of SNRIs that are used for females to enhance sex drive. So it kind of matters, like, where are you looking at the issue and what do you think might be your issue? But normally it's just probably more androgens are going to realistically like increase sex drive quite well. So yeah,
100%. And I just want to say anyway, I've said it twice, I can't stress this enough, this is assuming diet and exercise. Those are going to work a lot more than jumping to straight to these interventions. But yeah, diet, exercise, and then consider the pharmacological options.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. No, but thank you for the question, though. It was an interesting one.
It was a good one. Did you have any more this week in particular?
Yeah, I did actually. So this one was seems to be an ongoing debate in a muscle factory. I think I mentioned to you one was, I guess it's a sort of two-part question, so I'll try to split it up. One, is there a negative feedback loop with administration of T4 in basically your TSH and your thyroid stimulating hormone? And should you or would you advise running T4, a certain dosage of T4 year round?
So yeah, and this is always really interesting because there's really a lot of confliction within the community at large, and I will say, like, it's also what makes this almost more difficult is that it's harder to be objective about this because people's blood work reacts differently. But from what I've seen, at least the majority of the blood work that I have done with clients is like the reality of the matter is usually T4 within a physiological range to maybe slightly super physiological, regulate the thyroid axis. In fact, what it does is just favorably reduce TSH, which some might confuse as downregulating the thyroid axis, but ultimately you're still functional and there's no issues at hand. Right? Like if you have a TSH of 1 versus 4, it's going to be better for risks of cancer and the development of like thyroid nodules, but you still have the thyroid being supplied through the administration of T4. So I personally don't think there's any downregulation, but there is a good argument to be made that it might.
Yes. And again, as Kolton said, there seems to be, varying mileage with individuals using it. To be honest, again, I also preface this by saying, just because a lot of people do it doesn't mean it's correct. We used to, never mind. There's lots of things we used in the past, which is not good. But anyway, long story short or you used to give trend to females. So think about that. But anyway, long story short is, at least with myself, the blood work that I've seen and athletes I've seen, coming on and off of T4, whether it was based on just availability or they were just, basically experimenting that. I've never seen any sort of downregulation of THH, where you use THH levels almost always in range. But 100% with T3, the bioavailable form, I've 100% seen people shut down and go hypothyroid from that. And you see it all the time when people stop everything post contest. And yes, the huge amount of calories and the other fat burners play a role too. But I am convinced that part of that is dropping T3 and basically going hypothyroid or having low levels of thyroid hormone post downregulation.
Yeah. So there's a really great paper, and I love using AI tools. By the way, they're fucking awesome. There's this new one I found called SciSpace, SCI space, and it is the coolest fucking thing ever. It makes like research reviews infinitely quicker. But there's this one paper that has a literal single oral dose of thyroxine T4 administered, and essentially what happens, they measure, is that the TRH stimulated TSH release is inhibited and indicating a downregulation of TSH secretion, but not a downregulation of thyroid axis function. So granted, this study was done in 1980. It's probably one of the only ones where a single dose of thyroid was taken, and then actually visually seeing what happens to individuals. So I don't think it's inhibiting the thyroid axis in its entirety, because that would just not be like, in what sense is it being inhibited? Is like TSH being lowered? Yes. But is objectively that a health marker we want to control? Yes. Right. So like, are we down regulating thyroid stimulating hormone? Absolutely. But the rest of the axis is completely functional, which in a sense is like, you're never going to get a zero TSH taking T4. That just won't happen. It's just going to come down, which is favorable. That's what we want in most people. Just as we submit ourselves to a high caloric intake, high drug use, high growth rates, that TSH is always going to be redlined. And if we can bring it down into a really good and healthy normal range, we're going to save ourselves from having to take thyroid for the rest of our life, or having to get surgery as an emergency need when you have granulars on your thyroid, or even actual thyroid cancer. So I mean, that's a really good question though, but yeah.
So again, also as a sort of additional caveat to it, is simply get regular blood work, see where your thyroid hormone's at, and then have an appropriate dosage depending on where it's sitting.
It's a really good point. It's like almost too good.
Everything.
Okay, so we got a couple more questions. Do you guys like the use of nattokinase? If so, do you view it necessary if on cycle, or just a helpful tool?
So my understanding is it helps deal with blood clots and assisting with blood pressure. It's one of those things where we take a lot of stuff and get a lot of pill fatigue. So what I personally prefer is, depending on the individual, what we're trying to look at. If we're looking at blood pressure, I generally prefer to go to an ARB. Not that I'm saying everyone should be on medication, but usually if you're an individual with elevated blood pressure, you've already done the steps of increasing your hydration, increasing your electrolytes, taking some magnesium, improving your diet, doing some cardiovascular activity. If you've done all of that and it's still not in range, I don't think nattokinase is going to be as effective as an ARB. Now, if you would like to induce a nattokinase, as part of your supplementation protocol, in conjunction with, the nutrition and cardiovascular, program you put yourself to put your blood pressure in range, absolutely. But I feel like once you implemented what I just said, your only real method is an ARB. So yes, it can be helpful, but depending on where the athlete is with their blood pressure, it's probably not going to be my first point of call, and it's definitely not going to be my last to improve it. It's just going to be a little bit of icing on the cake, so to speak. Like, it's not going to bring your shit diet and high PEDs into range, taking a bit of Nattokinase. So yeah, that's sort of my view on it.
Yeah, Nattokinase is great. I think what people might not understand is it's naturally derived from it's a thrombotic enzyme that is basically produced as a byproduct from a bacteria strain called Bacillus. And you can do a GI map test, and I've done many on bodybuilders where you see that their actual population of Bacillus is either completely void or just really, really low. The like singular diet that they eat with just kind of the same foods every day sort of thing. And essentially, if that's downregulated, you won't be producing your own nattokinase. So supplementing is, I think, great if you need it. But again, I think there's so many more things we can look at. And I think one of the biggest problems in our industry is that people look for really quick solutions to problems that are actually indicative of something that might be greater. In this case, maybe gut dysbiosis. And I think nattokinase is great, right? Like, I'm not saying it doesn't work as like a potent thrombotic agent, but it's not something that I would lean on if I had like some form of like potential thrombosis, right? Like, I would actually probably leverage pharmaceuticals greater than any form of, said, taking an ARB or taking pharmacology as far as like high dose fish oil, which is actually prescribed in cases where people are taking large doses of EPA. I think that stuff is far greater proved to work over a long period of time than not. And just to be real, like, there's not good human clinical research on this stuff at all. So that's kind of the bigger issue at hand, is like, a couple of people said it was great. They cited a couple studies, but we just have like a couple in vivo studies, not in vitro studies, not in vivo. So it's like, what do we actually know is happening? Not too much. And it's just sort of a, hey, take this as a good insurance policy sort of thing. So
exactly. And another thing to add to that is one of the, I guess, less scientific ways that we experiment on ourselves or test, how does supplementation affect us, is one. Okay, I'll also caveat this by saying that when you are having polypharmacy or polysupplementation, this does become more difficult. But I would say is, don't necessarily take our word for it. If you are experiencing high blood pressure and you monitor your blood pressure consistently, what I would say is simply have your blood pressure readings, then start taking nattokinase, monitor over time, and see if it trends down. And if that's the only variable you've changed, like you haven't increased cardio, you haven't changed your diet, you've changed on other variables and you see an improvement, hey, maybe it does work well for you. But as Kolton said, not really our first point of call.
Yeah. And even just, again, using this AI tool, I love this fucking thing. I'm going to use it for the rest of my life. The TLDR, basically, of all these studies done on it, and at least human trials, which you can select for on this, it's basically showing literally the results of nattokinase supplementation has a null effect on subclinical forms of atherosclerosis or thrombosis. Like, in human data, it's like, what do we really have? Probably not a whole lot. So sorry to be the boner killer. Yeah, but this is kind of what it is.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Following up, Joe just followed up with this question. Thanks for the suggestions. She's been dieting, also supplementing with 50 milligrams DHEA for a while now, and was wondering about her libido. I think your comment sort of shows, you said she's been dieting for a while now. Honestly, a decreasing calories and a caloric deficit for a prolonged period of time is going to kill or decrease at least most people's libidos. And I would argue it's probably from that. So there you have it. Depending on how lean she wants to get, maybe consider a diet break, just pushing up to maintenance calories for a period of time. That can potentially assist with diet fatigue and maybe temporarily increase libido. Of course, if she has a set goal when it comes to what she's dieting for, that may or may not be appropriate. But if she's been dieting for a prolonged period of time, I would say more than 12 weeks in this caloric deficit, I potentially would introduce a maintenance phase of 1 to 2 weeks, maybe even a bit longer. to assist with libido and basically just diet fatigue in general.
Yeah. And if maybe, again, considering the fact that she's you said early 40s, so maybe, around 45 is when I start to get concerned against menopause. So maybe she's premenopausal, and again, looking at things like micronized progesterone or other various compounds to combat that is quite important. I mean, it's really, really important, to be honest. So, we got a question from Nick P. Again, so for someone who has low T but solid muscle on their frame, is it fair to say adding TRT to above normal or normal levels will alter their physique in a positive manner? Yes. More drugs work, and it always will. But how well do they work? It varies greatly. So essentially, the way to consider it is you can have more testosterone even if you already are having a great deal of muscle on your frame, and you might see a great response, and you might rapidly gain muscle. In other cases, though, maybe you have low androgen receptor density, and maybe androgens aren't even the thing that you're responding to. It might be the IGF-1 mediated pathways, and you have great IGF-1 sensitivity as opposed to androgen receptor sensitivity, or density. So it might be something other than that, right? But I would assure you that adding more drugs to the situation, whether it's in physiological range or not, even a titration of 50 milligrams at a 200 milligram dose, that's still almost 20, that is 25% of your total androgens going up, which might not seem like a big deal right now, but to a guy who's taking a gram, like 50 milligrams doesn't sound like shit, but when you do the math, 25% is a lot of fucking drug to be added. If I added the gram at 1,000 milligrams, I'm adding, or if I added 25% of the gram, I'm adding 250 milligrams, which is your total dose, right? So I think, yes, you'll grow muscle, and it would be a positive influence on your physique. No doubt.
Yeah. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here. Assuming we're doing some form of hypertrophy training and protein-rich diet, we're going to see the most physiological changes. I mean, I'm just going to always put that out there because I know a lot of people like to hop on weird. This seems to be like TRT seems to be also quite common in the mainstream, where there's less focus on the dieting and training aspect of it. And don't get me wrong, if you don't, if you got low T, you can just go the route of optimizing your sex hormones, but I would always preferentially combine that with diet and exercise. But yeah, that's my rant over, so caveat over. But yes, as Colin said, it would make a difference.
Absolutely.
Also, I think we have a question from Leon. Is there a maximum amount of calories the body can absorb in a day? I.e., some people are better at bulking as energy expenditure is the same, but is gaining on lower calories. No, I would say any additional calories that you consume would probably be at a point in time in an extreme surplus, simply just stored as adipose tissue. If you increase your protein to extreme amounts, just increase your urea. Your urine, you just basically excrete it out when you pee. I would say the same for excessive amounts of carbohydrates and fat. It's probably just going to get stored as adipose tissue. So no. And then the second part of your question, some people are better at bulking as energy expenditure is the same, but gain. I think that just depends on your metabolic rate. As we all know, our metabolism can shift. Even certain pharmacology can shift our metabolism. Clenbuterol, T3, T4, growth hormone, multiple different pharmaceutical agents can affect that, as well as things like cardio training, and even I would argue the type of food we're eating with like the thermogenic effect of food. So I would simply say it really depends on one's metabolic rate, and also which is also affected by muscle mass they carry on their bodies. There's a multitude of factors which can affect metabolism, and I think that would dictate basically what their intake is, or how efficient they are, so to speak, with the calories that they're consuming.
Yeah. I mean, there's once you really get into GI map tests, you learn a lot about this stuff. But even just the distribution of bacteria can change someone's metabolic rate by up to 25%, which is stronger than any lipolytic compound that we have. So that's like one variable, and it's a very large variable, but there's hundreds of those, right? Like when we're talking at a cellular level, how many ribosomes does one individual have versus another? How many myonuclei do you have? How many, it just goes on and on and on. And there's even genomic traits that are a bit different. How much GLUT4 upregulation do you have when insulin is present in the bloodstream? There's all sorts of different things, right? I would say that most people are probably going to absorb, on average, and absorb is a tough, like, are you talking about like into tissue? Because there's obviously thermogenesis, and the more food you eat, the more thermogenesis is going to happen. So it's like hard to say, are you talking about like just absorb? If you're talking from mouth to ass, there is a finite amount of food you can absorb, but that is a very high amount of food. And usually you would be unable to eat before reaching that point. If you have diarrhea, that is a key indication that you're not absorbing the food you're eating. If your stool is harder, that means you're absorbing the food that you're eating. And that's basically the best way I can summate what we're talking about here. I have bikini girls who eat, I have one right now who's eating 3,700 calories a day, and she's very much so struggling to put on weight. I have other people who are men who are 230 pounds who struggle to keep weight off at 2,500 calories. So the disposition is wild there, and it just kind of depends on the individual, I suppose. But I would say for the most part, yeah, there's probably, once you get up in those high fat counts, lipids are prokinetics as far as our GI tract goes. So those higher fat meals, like we were just looking at the nutritional facts for Burger King and McDonald's, and the Burger King triple Whopper has 160 grams of fat in like one burger, which is fucking perplexing to me. That's more fat than I consume in a day. And I would imagine after eating that plus some, you would see a lot of lipid in your stool or have diarrhea or something close to diarrhea. Basically, the softer your stool is, the less food you're digesting, period. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, though. It's a very interesting question.
I think Nick P had a follow-up one. Also, if someone has high DHEA-S, DHA sulfate, 400s, not sure if it's actually a bad or good reading with lower end hormone tests, etc. Does that mean there's an issue with conversion of hormones?
Okay, so I'm just going to read that again. It's also if someone has high DHEA. Yeah, so this is a really good question, actually. And I'll actually pull up a picture of the pathway of steroidogenesis to make a little bit more, at least hopefully a little bit more of this, and give you kind of an idea of, I might even actually have a picture saved of it somewhere, but give you an idea of what's happening here. So there's a lot of factors that can kind of intertwine themselves with the pathway of steroidogenesis, which is exactly what we're talking about here. And it can be affected by many lifestyle habits for the most part. So what we're looking at, and I'm trying to find a really good, easy to read graph. Yes, it's pretty great actually. So I'll share this one. But essentially, if someone is, I would imagine this is about your significant other and she's taking DHEA, that might be why DHEA is high. Blocking the production of hormones still, and we're seeing like a downregulatory effect there. Then we're looking at the pathway of steroidogenesis here. You have cholesterol, and then cholesterol gets metabolized into pregnenolone, progesterone, and so on and so forth. But down the line, you basically have DHEA, right? Which is the numbers. This one's kind of hard to read as well. So I'm going to here. This is kind of not so great. They're hard to find good. Okay, this one's good. So basically you have from pregnenolone going into 17-hydroxypregnenolone to DHEA to androstenedione or androstenediol, and then testosterone, right? So essentially what might be happening is the enzyme 3-beta-hydroxy steroid dehydrogenase or 17-beta, I'm not going to say the whole thing because I already just said it, is going to be impeded. And those two enzymes are impeded by a lot of different factors. Adiposity is one of them. Do you smoke? That's another one. Do you have estrogen dominance? So like, what is her estrogen levels at? If she has too much estrogen, the 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzyme will be downregulated significantly. And unfortunately, these aren't things we can accurately gauge from just your standard lab. This is like really complex laboratory work, and unfortunately it's not like readily commercial available yet. But you want to ensure that this individual has a really good lifestyle before saying like, you know, let's go crazy and throw, you know, the bath water at it. It's probably more of an issue with conversion due to enzymatic issues from lifestyle. I wish I had a great graph somewhere. I think it's on my MacBook, but about that. And it is really critical to understand, honestly, because for especially females, it can actually change their physiology. But I simply just don't have that in front of me. But there are some really good graphs out there. You can look at what impedes those dehydrogenase enzymes, and the rest will be solved.
Correct. And also to add to that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't also potentially an elevation in DHA sulfate potentially be indication of like adrenal fatigue or a lot of adrenal gland stress, where physiological, and as you touched on, there's many things that can cause this, but like the physiological and psychological factors. And you mentioned she's been dieting for a long period of time, and to be honest, that could cause that, an elevation of being in a prolonged, you know, caloric deficit.
Yeah. No, that is actually a really good. That is a really good point. So if you got her cortisol measured, there's a DHEA to cortisol ratio, and it's actually really correlated to the degree of, sort of like you mentioned, chronic stress, right? Overproduction of cortisol dominance, and then DHEA sort of trying to upregulate as it tries to counteract the insufficiencies that cortisol is creating. So it could be that. There's also other DHEA sulfate to, oh my gosh, there's another ratio out there, but I can't remember it at the current moment. But it is important. It's actually a really clear dictating ratio to tell someone whether they have adrenal fatigue or stress, or other metabolic issues relative to that too. So that is a good one as well, for sure. Yeah.
If that was blood work was recent, I mean, all the more reason that potential diet break. I don't know. Again, I don't know what else is going on, what other stresses there are in you or your partner's life. But again, that could be all more for the diet break. So potentially implement that. It could solve a lot of issues which we are experiencing.
Yeah. And I do want to say too, it's like, it's so multifactorial there, and this is why it's hard to tell people what's wrong with them from these questions, because it could be thyroid function. It could be, and that could be also why her sex drive is low. We didn't have any information on her thyroid hormone. It could be parathyroid hormone, which regularly I've never seen on most people's tests. It could be so many different things. I don't want to be like a conclusive guy and be like, here is the problem, because we certainly don't know.
Yeah. Often the answer to everything is it depends, and we need to look at like the full planner of blood work, the full lifestyle, what's going on in one's life. Like when we have our athletes, right, we are almost monitoring like every aspect to come to more educated conclusions where, you know, we have check-ins, we have metric and data tracking, we have regular blood work, and in conjunction with using all these metrics together, we are able to somewhat give an educated opinion on, hey, this could be it, let's implement that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Those are some really good questions from Nick P. Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, answering the high level stuff today. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a good one.
Yeah.
It's probably been beaten to death, and you'll answer this, but I was asked a question of, so we know that DHT derivatives such as Masteron and Primobolan can help modulate or control estradiol. But what would you say, if any, the difference between, I have an opinion on this, but what would you say the difference is between Primobolan and Masteron and how they modulate estrogen? Is there a difference? And will you see a difference in blood work on your estradiol levels if you're using Masteron versus Primobolan to control estradiol?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to say I have an answer on that. I think both hypothetically should act as a reverse aromatase inhibitor, but they're obviously different carbon chain molecules, so they're going to be different in their action. So I mean, from anecdotally speaking, it's like I guess I see a pretty, again, this is where my bias is skewed because unfortunately I do have most of my clients using Masteron, not Primobolan. I can't remember last time I actually had someone take Primobolan on my roster for years. So, but except you, because like that brand you have, you can only get it overseas. Like you can't get that in the United States. So it's hard to acquire real Primobolan here. And I think now it's even getting to the point where Masteron might be faked because it's like everyone's talking about Masteron, but that's a whole other thing. That I think Masteron's the safest bet for most people, but I think you have more favorable results with that particularly thing, estrogen management with Primobolan. I could be wrong though.
Yep. I think Kurt Haven spoke about this, but supposedly they've just discovered like new metabolites in Primobolan, which supposedly is supposed to have an aromatizing or anti-aromatizing effect, where supposedly that can actually causes reduction in estradiol in your serum concentration levels. Again, do not quote me on that one. And I have seen blood work of, literally I looked at two people's blood work quite recently who, that's the way we were trying to test if the Primobolan was real. Like, is there going to be an effect on estradiol? And literally 300 milligrams of this Primobolan caused their estradiol to drop to like 36, well within the reference range. On, I think the individual was on, I want to say 500 milligrams plus of testosterone, which historically for them would cause them to aromatize quite heavily. Whereas I don't know, I've seen with Masteron is an interesting one where I've had individuals use Masteron, their estradiol is like top end or even like 20% above the reference range, but then are experiencing zero side effects from the elevation in estradiol. But then when the DHT derivative Masteron is pulled out and estradiol is somewhat the same, they start experiencing side effects. So my understanding was that potentially, as you said, reversely or prevents binding to the androgen receptor, where you may have the metabolites. I think that's an easy one. You may still have the metabolites in your serum concentration levels, but it does not bind. So on blood work, it appears elevated, but then there's no actual binding to that or any affinity to that, which is not causing any side effects. That was at least my understanding. But to be honest, I've previously thought they both decreased serum concentration levels, but it seems it varies on blood work. But again, don't necessarily quote me on that one.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to say that, which I've seen in myself, that oh my god, it's such a useless compound. I forgot its name. Proviron. Proviron lowers estrogen, and it absolutely does for myself. But then it's like, why? Because it's a different structure altogether. It has a different molecular weight, and it does different things at the receptor site. So I don't know. I mean, it's very interesting, right? Like, I guess it's just hard to say for sure. One experiment I think we should run when we get to Thailand is, if we have December, I would love to do like pharmaceutical growth hormone versus generic growth hormone between you and I, and then do like a 12 weeks of like high dose growth hormone, do like a thorough testing of blood to see where the differences might lie, and then on like a physique assessment, obviously keeping calories in somewhat of a phase would be awesome or whatnot. But after our show or what have you, because we're planning to compete still, yeah, or no?
Yeah. Well, like, as you well know, with at least my plans is a long growth phase to try bring up the lagging areas. And then depending on how successful, how that long goes, I'll probably look at doing a prep.
When's that one show that you're talking about? That was it March?
Yeah, so there's been a bunch of various shows in Thailand. So I think they potentially are announcing an NPC show in March. Still haven't heard anything from that yet. But everyone sort of knows everyone here. So as soon as it's announced, everyone will know. That's the NPC show. There are various PCA shows which happen in Thailand. And then what's also been announced is there are now no longer only 2 periods in Australia where you can compete. So previously it was like, I think it was previously like March, April, and September, October, with various shows across Australia. But now I think they've included a mid-year show in July. So there's also the opportunity in Australia for 3 different shows.
You'd fly all the way there to do that?
I was about to say there's another option which I think is more preferable is actually the Philippines.
That would be a good one. That would be a really good one. And it'd probably be I hate to be a guy, but it'd probably be a really easy show. Like I don't like the guy, but I mean, God, at what shit? The average Filipino is probably like 5'2", 5'3" or something. Like, I mean, geez, dude.
Yeah. Well, dude, you say that, and Kat went there. Kat being my partner, she went there a couple of months ago and actually watched or saw some of the competitors there, dude. And dude, people fly in for that show, so it's not as uncompetitive as you think. Lots and lots and lots of people fly in there. With most of the lineup was international because she was like,
wow,
she saw the Filipino like guys and girls. She's like, oh, like yeah, like not the deepest talent pool at least, but then saw the actual lineups and he was sending me videos, and I was like, holy shit, some serious competitors.
Yeah, I wonder, man, I would really like to. I feel like again, it would be probably like one of the funner shows to do, if that's even a word. But
yeah, there's usually NPC shows in Bangkok, which I'd be keen on. And then, like I said, if the shows are pretty close apart, I want to say Philippines is like I think like a 2 to 4 hour plane flight.
That's not bad, dude.
Quite short.
That's so
you
easy.
could literally hop over and yeah.
And you could really do some damage on one of those shows. Like if you step on the right stage, dude. Okay, there's the NPC Thailand regional show, which is in March 18th. So that's pretty fucking close. I don't know about that, but
they announced that. It must be recent.
Yeah, that's coming up quick.
Yeah,
it's coming up. Bam.
Yeah. I'd literally prep like now.
I would have to like literally start, and then it's just like I don't want to move everything and like move into a new country on prep. I feel like it'd be
don't do that.
It'd be such a shit show, man.
Don't get me wrong, our transition here was like quite smooth. We do appreciate like all the people that have helped us. Thank you, Steve, Aaron,
Steve,
Chris, yourself, Nick, lots of guys. Thank you. But even then, there was still like getting into routine, figuring everything out, and sort of even now, like I'm only been here 3 months now, I finally feel like everything's clicking and I'm in routine. And to throw a prep into that, like fuck.
Yeah, dude, I'd be really nuts. I'm super excited to go. Truly, I'm really excited, and I think it's gonna be like a wild experience, but such a good one. And it's honestly like one of the stupid things. And I'm not trying to be that guy that like forces you to train with me, but I'm super excited to have a training partner because it's been like years since I've ever trained with anyone. So that would be enjoyable just every once in a while, It's just like the stupid little things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's sort of what I did in Australia with my longtime training partner, Jimmy. Man's off social media, completely lives off the grid, but he's acting like a legitimate monster. The guy can deadlift like 3 times a week, no issues. He's actually a school teacher, but he's jacked as hell. He's actually on my website. Dude is like seriously huge and is like lean year round. I keep trying to get him to compete. But anyway, long story short, same thing with him where like we would just train every now and then. It was definitely helpful on like leg days and certain things when like you just want additional motivation and just like friendly competition and shit.
Yeah, I gotta see that motherfucker. That's crazy. Yeah, it'd be really fun. Like just the area, it's like so conducive because here there's not many. Like there's bodybuilding obviously, but it's far and few between. Like you have to find the right gym, know the right people, talk to the right people, and hopefully they're accepting of you. In Thailand, it's literally the main guys like sitting right there, like down the street. Essentially, you got Nick, you got Steve, you got Aaron, you got like all the dudes who are in the sauce, like in there, and I love that kind of mentality. It's awesome.
Yeah, even with the Pattaya muscle factory, because I think you're referring to the muscle factory in Bangkok. Yeah, there's heaps of like really competitive people. To be honest, even like some of the female demographic in the Pattaya gym, like there's multiple IFBB pros and like the figure and wellness divisions. So there's like a lot of advanced competitors. Oh, I think we might have lost you there. Oh, I think Kolton might have cut out there. This might only be me. Give him a second. Hopefully, he returns. Oh, no, it's just me. Okay, well, thank you guys. I guess if we got no more questions, I might wrap this up because I think Kolton is experiencing technical difficulties. But really appreciate everyone tuning in. If anyone's got any questions at all, anytime, please shoot them over. Like my Instagram is hyperdrive hypertrophy, so hyperdrive.hypertrophy. Kolton is up there, I think at Coach Kolton. So you can find us on Instagram, probably where we're most active. Shoot us a message anytime, bodybuilding, life, pharmacology, nutrition, training, anything that you may have, burning questions on, we will get to either during these live streams or even sometimes we might answer directly. But yeah, we really do appreciate, everyone tuning in. Like, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your support and your viewership. And yeah, it's great having you guys on. And if you've got any questions at all, please shoot them over. Otherwise, I might call it here. But yeah, guys, take care. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you.